What's up, guys? Today I had on Samara Bay, a successful speaker, sought-after speech coach, and author of the book Permission to Speak. Samara is a highly accomplished woman. Her journey to become a speech coach is fascinating, having once lost her voice for months without speaking. She is now a coach to many public figures, candidates for U.S. Congress, and many more people in Hollywood. She's been hired by everyone from Marvel to Netflix to help movie stars integrate good acting with good accents. Some of her clients include Gal Gadot, Brosnan, Penelope Cruz, Ricky Martin, and the list goes on. Her work on rethinking the sound of power has been featured in the New York Times Magazine, Forbes, CBS Sunday Morning, Tamron Hall, Slate, and many more. We spoke a lot about the concept of changing the sound of power, how our voices and the way we speak affect the way we are treated, our voice stories versus our personal stories, how giving authentic power to our voices with a focus on those of women and minorities is helping shift power within companies, and how that affects business as a whole. The thing is, you don't have to be a public speaker or CEO to see the immense value that bringing power to your voice can have. This is just as powerful to a parent of a teenager as it is to someone speaking to an audience of 10,000. I love this episode, guys. If you like the show, please share it with a homie, tag me on social, and definitely subscribe. It means the world to me. Enjoy the show. Samara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So the first thing is, congrats on your book launch. That is a big deal. You just did that. It's so much work. I can only imagine. So big shout out to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I have to say, writing a book is very lonely, and then launching it is the opposite. And I've interacted. I have this cold, but I might have just gotten it from literally any of the hundreds of people I interacted with in the last week.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so my first question that I always ask is, what is your last oh shit moment? What is the first thing that comes to mind? And I'm sure you got a bunch of those. So it's going to be easy, I feel like, especially with this whole book launch.
Wait, define oh shit. Is that
Exactly.
Yay or is that boo?
Whatever you want to define it. It could be awesome. It could be really bad. It could be in between, but whatever comes to mind.
I'll tell you, yesterday I ran a private workshop. I've been doing a lot of public things and then also private ones for cool different organizations. And 3 people in the chat said that they finished my book and started it again.
Wow.
We're 1 week after launch. And my mind was blown.
Yeah.
That's kind of greater than any feedback I could have expected.
Yeah. You're like, or unless you couldn't understand it at all, so you had to read it. No, I'm kidding.
Totally. However, I'm confident enough at this point because honestly, I've been getting a huge amount of positive feedback.
That's amazing.
So I know.
Yeah.
It's so lovely. People are just saying it's cracking them open. I had a woman I'm dear friends with who does DEI work, who went to my event on Saturday and said that I said things, the woman who was interviewing me and I said things that she has not heard in 25 years of equity and justice work.
Wow. That's amazing.
This kind of feedback is deeply meaningful. It's very oh shit.
Yeah, already getting ripples, of effect. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, congrats. That's a great oh shit. People are reading my book again as soon as they finish it, right off the bat. Awesome.
Wow.
When I launch a book, Samara, which is going to happen sooner than later. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud. See, look at that.
Oh my God, you guys, are you all hearing this with me? This is good. We're here for you.
That's great. Only a few people know that I'm writing, but that is funny. I've never really said that. Look at that. I'm just kidding. Okay.
I just give people permission to speak wherever they are. So,
Just it's too easy, The theme is so dead on. I love it. Samara, why voice? Why this? Where did this passion come from?
It's so interesting. I really had to dig down into that and when I was writing this book, because here's the secret. I don't actually care about anyone's voice. That sounds ridiculous to say, but I get a lot of people saying, oh, you must be judging the sound of my voice. No. And in fact, I made it very clear to my publisher that they were not allowed to give me a book cover that had sound waves on it, right? This is just not about the science of audio.
Right.
But I am very deeply interested in everybody's relationship to their own voice, which tends to be quite fraught and actually a lifelong story of myths, of drama, of comments, offhanded comments that had outsized impact. And if I'm totally honest, I think this started, I'm branding myself as a theater nerd and I'm just owning it. When I was 7, I saw My Fair Lady, this musical about basically a low-class, quote unquote, flower girl who has a low-class accent in England, Cockney accent, and this fancy guy who takes her on as a social experiment to teach her a new accent and see if her life opens up. And the answer is yes. And I, of course, at 7, wouldn't have described it that way, but I was learning something about the connection between how we talk and how we get treated. That I think stayed with me. And I went through a whole theater acting career and then came out the other side as a dialect coach, coaching actors on accents, on the minutia of sounds and how a tiny sound, one direction or another, will affect where we think someone's from, how educated we think someone is, how much they deserve to be in a power position. And then, during the 2018 midterms, I got recruited to coach women who were running for office for the first time. And it was pro bono, it was through moveon.org. I had no idea if I would be able to apply what I do over in Hollywood here in politics. And the answer was yes, because these are bigger questions than vowels and consonants, right? These are questions for all of us about how we show up in the moments that matter, what version of ourselves we bring forward, how we hide vocally and don't.
Yeah, I had that question written down to ask you, the correlation between how we sound and how we're treated. So just to go into that a little bit more right now, since you brought it up, do you feel that, so there's the obvious sort of ones, right? Like you mentioned, right? So it's someone that maybe comes from a lower income, lower socioeconomic area that has a particular accent. So they are now treated that way. They're treated with less respect, potentially given less opportunity and all those things, right? Do you think that could also go the other way around? Are there certain are there certain international accents that may be seen as like, oh, that's even more prestigious and going to give you more respect? Or is an accent almost always a negative thing?
I'll tell you, it's not, right? I think anyone listening has some instincts around this. Some accents code for elite. And if I'm going to get real honest about this, because there's linguistics going on here, but there's also social justice going on here. And we need to talk about the ways in which accent bias runs along class lines and along race lines, right? And along gender lines. So just to name it, colonialism. If you hear a British accent and you think, oh my God, that person must be so smart, regardless of what they're saying, it's because Americans have a complicated relationship with the Brits, but we know for sure that they owned us at one point, right? So this is real, and this happens below the level of conscious thought. And what I'm interested in this realm is linguists inside of linguistic institutions all over the world know this stuff. There are studies. Accent bias, quote unquote, is real. It's studied, it's known, but it's not mainstream. Right? And my interest is not just bringing it mainstream, but honoring that each of us are both a victim and the perpetrator of voice bias. In what ways are we accidentally upholding systems of power we don't even like, just because biases are biases? They happen instantly. And of course, the goal is not to shame you on that, but to say, well, what would be your second wiser thought? Oops, I just discounted that person because of their accent. I caught myself. Now what? How do I get curious instead?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, so I'm from Argentina originally. I moved when I was pretty young. So I was, I lost my accent. And so English is my second language. But I grew up with my mom who knew English very, very well. And when she came to the States, I mean, she had this obsession with getting rid of her accent, right? She hated sounding like a non-native.
It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah,
we can judge somebody who's obsessed with losing their accent, but we know the social value of losing your accent.
Exactly. So for her, but the funny thing is that as time passed, and I mean, she's an author herself, and she's a speaker, and she does all these amazing things.
Shout out to your mom.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Shout out to Sarah. So but later on, all these people would come and tell her like, oh my gosh, like your voice is like the sound of an angel. Like it's so
Mm.
calming. I love your accent. It's so sophisticated. And like, I think she had to have had, she probably has heard that 1,000 times and still would probably choose to not have an accent. It's just so funny
Mhm.
how we're wired to want to sound like.
I have a movie star I've worked with who I will not name because I'm being very classy, who said to me in the privacy of, a trailer before going on to set, no matter what I do and how successful I am and how I sound, I will still be an immigrant.
Wow.
And,
I mean,
literally, an immigrant is fine. An
yeah,
immigrant
there's nothing wrong with that.
this is how humans
Wait,
move through
the
space.
judgment
But
before.
you know what she meant.
Yeah,
People will judge me and put me into a category that I haven't
Right.
chosen my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So Samara, you say that everyone has a voice story. What's the difference between a voice story and your personal story?
Such a good question. I think of a voice story, which I really just sort of made up to try to capture the spirit of this, as like a money story. So we know that a money story, if we have one, is
Mhm.
not about the facts of our own life or even the facts of our own interaction with money, but rather some of the bullshit and myths that we've collected, both from our personal experience and from the culture at large and the stories that get told culturally, the messaging around, in the case of money is evil, money
Right.
is dirty, for artists, if you have it, you're a sellout, right? So similarly, there are voice stories. And I'm kind of here to just wave a flag and say they exist, even though voices are invisible. And almost none of us have language or any experience naming our voice story. So here's a few examples. Some of it does interact with our personal story. Some of it is, where did we grow up?
Right.
What did our parents sound like? Did we and they have an accent different from our neighbors, right? What was going to school like when you were really little? Did you know that you fit in or did you know that you stood out? What did belonging feel like? And were there any choices or changes that you made in how you talked in order to fit in on a purely survival level? And then there are these much more, I don't know, wiggly, wily questions, like when you left home, did you shed any aspects of your identity vocally because you could tell this was your chance to change how you get treated?
Mm.
In your first job, when you were dating somebody, when did you learn, anyone listening, when did you learn how to come across as likable or as smart or get a little closer to quote unquote being taken seriously? I went to Princeton undergrad. I surely picked up habits there of, oh, that's how that person sounds when they sound smart. Could I move my mouth a tiny bit in order to approximate that sound? Yeah, I think I probably could. Let's try that. Now, does that become the new me or is that fake? Right? These questions there's no right answer, but they are indicative of a life lived in constant flux with the people around us and as I like to say, what we've done to get by in rooms of power.
Yeah.
And sometimes this entails the ways in which we have learned to play small or be unintimidating. A lot of the things that are called quote unquote feminine markers in linguistics, upspeak and vocal fry, saying sorry when you don't really need to. These are actually brilliant ways of signaling to the more powerful people around you that you are not a threat. Until, for many of us, for a lot of people who are picking up my book, they're like, wow, those habits kept me small. They worked. I'm really over them and I've perhaps outgrown them. And what is next? And no one knows it quite as literally as I just articulated it, right? But there's some feeling of whatever I'm doing isn't working anymore and I need more power.
Yeah. So interesting. As you were talking about that, I'm thinking about like my personal voice story, and mine is so funny because it's so all over the place. Just from the basics, that my accent in Argentinian Spanish is from a region that would be almost equivalent to like our Southern accent, which is completely different than my mega Southern Californian accent that I have when I speak English. So right there, I've got two completely divided types of accents. When I speak Spanish, I'm seen in one way. When I speak English, I'm seen in another way. I also noticed that when I went to Australia and spent some time there, everyone loved my accent. It was the sexiest thing in the world. But then I go to London, it's like, nah, American. It's just so funny, right? So it just depends on where you are, who you're talking
It's so
to.
cultural.
And
there's such great examples. And the other part of everybody's voice story, which maybe you experienced as well, maybe those of you listening did, is offhanded comments. I said they have an outsized impact. Those comments can be well-meaning, right? It can be a uncle or a boss or somebody who took you aside and said, listen, I noticed you say like a lot.
Right.
No one's going to take you seriously if you do that, but I bet you can figure out how to, stop it. And you're like, A, I don't know how to stop it. And B, now I feel self-conscious.
Yeah.
And C, I'm embarrassed or maybe even ashamed because why did I pick up this habit that's now hurting me?
Mm-hmm.
What is this self-sabotage bullshit? What did I do? Why did I do this?
Yeah.
Right? So then we've got all of these layers of drama inside of us. And everybody, when I mention this, it turns out everybody has it. Some of it is, oh, this girl in 4th grade told me my voice was annoying and I've never forgotten it. Right? Some of it is stuff that happens in a work context. Some of it is, if you Google, how do I sound more authoritative or how do I sound like a leader? Google will so helpfully spit out a bunch of how-to answers that are technically doable, from keep your voice low, pitch-wise,
No with upward inflections. Yeah.
Right. No upward inflection, but also no sing-songy, no up and downy, right? Don't get emotional. That will scare people and make you seem unhinged. Speak at 75% your regular rate. I love that one. So it sort of suggests that if we want to sound powerful, we should always speak in a measured pace. It's like, yes, these are quick fixes that will absolutely signify to your audience, oh, that's a powerful person. But I wonder if these quick fixes are actually hurting us long term. And that's what I'm really interested in, because we are here to change what power sounds like. We're here to become the type of leaders we would like there to be more of in the world, and not just continue to chase whatever that old standard was.
And so that's what you're here to change, what the sound of power sounds like, and also how that change, who has the power, right? But before we go into who has the power and how that affects business or the world in general, what is the sound of power?
Hey guys, I just want to remind you, if you want to find more content like this, you can visit sebastiannaum.com. That's Sebastian, Naum.com. You can also get a ton of other marketing resources from myself and my agencies, ranging from SEO to social media, influencer marketing, branding, web development, and more. Again, that's sebastiannaum.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the show.
I like to think of this in terms of the old sound of power and the new sound of power. Of course, inevitably, there's a range in both categories, and I don't mean to oversimplify so much that it's meaningless. But I will say that list of Google suggestions comes from a long lineage of who has been allowed to speak on a stage. I mean, from 2,000 years ago in the ancient Greeks to, 50 years ago to 20 years ago, depending on who you are and what, industry you're in. And there's some variety inside of that. Everybody has their own voice story, but there is a standard for what power sounds like that I think we can actually name. I make a point of this in my introduction, calling out, for example, John F. Kennedy in the clips that we watched in school, and Winston Churchill's rousing wartime oratory, and even in the modern day, Steve Jobs' famous commencement speech to Stanford, and Stephen Colbert and Tom Hanks speaking on two different sides of, the late night desk.
Yeah.
And I like to point out that it's not their fault. I'm not actually naming that any of these guys are doing anything wrong. Right. I'm just saying that they define and have defined easy authority for generations and generations and generations. They are who not only we tend to knee-jerk take seriously, but our parents and their parents and their parents. And then that leaves all the rest of us who aren't, that group of gentlemen I just named all fit into the category of
all white males.
Not just, right, exactly, but not just white males, but also straight and rich and large. physically large.
It's true.
So it leaves all the rest of us who aren't that
Yeah.
at this weird disadvantage where, I mean, I say it's weird. It's not weird because obviously the disadvantage is totally all of the, power structures that exist in our culture. But what's weird is we're stuck going, okay, so if I want to be a leader or an anchor or a hero or an expert, there's one way to sound, and it's those guys. It's not me. So I should put the work in to try to sound like them. And usually this happens below the level of conscious thought, right? Because if we were conscious of it, we would maybe hear the sort of idiocy inside of that. But instead we go, that's what it sounds like to be on a stage and get taken seriously. Do I have the physical mechanism inside my body to shift my sound to try to sound? Yeah, humans are amazingly resilient. We can totally pick up new sounds. Sure. Will we sound like ourselves? Will we recognize ourselves? Will we have fun inside of that? Less so.
It sounds like and feels like you have to change a lot of mindset to change the way you sound. But what happens if we change the way we sound and change the way we speak? Does that also in turn change our mindset?
I'm interested in that. I think it happens both ways for sure. I mean, breath alone. Look, a lot of us have a habit of holding our breath and forgetting to let it go. And obviously we are breathing enough to literally stay alive, but we're not really breathing enough for our whole lower part under our diaphragm, the messy gut part of our body, to actually rearrange itself because we have taken in so much breath that our diaphragm bends down into that area. And that is an ideal kind of breathing, but it's not something we're doing most of the time. But why? So you could say, oh, we just need to stretch more. We just need to do more exercises, more breath work ahead of time. That's cool. That is super good. Do it. Go for it. Take a run around the block. Your body will remember how to breathe. But we can also, on the mindset side of things that you're bringing up, we can also get curious about why we might be holding our breath. Not because there's one answer and one answer alone, but because asking that why, getting curious about why, is a way of saying, honor that most of us have picked up habits to get by in rooms that weren't made for us, like holding our breath in order to brace for whatever response we might get. And I'm not saying that it's good to do that, but I am saying that it's understandable to do that. And as you can tell, I am on a pretty huge anti-shame campaign around voices. So if we've picked up habits that helped us but are now hurting us, let's just celebrate that we're resilient and we've figured that out. And now what else?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just really getting curious. It just works with so much in life. Just if you really get
curious. I know, right? It's so easy to be like, oh, why me? Why did I do this stupid thing? I mean, I have this origin story myself that has really led to this work. I mean, not as a coach, but as a empathic human inside of the work, quite honestly. When I was 24, I was in the middle of an acting graduate program for 3 years, and I lost my voice, and it was months, and I wasn't sick. And I could not figure out what was happening, but it was too painful to speak.
Wow.
And I dropped out of the play I was in, obviously. I was still going to class because why not? But I was like a ghost. I mean, no one paid attention to me because they knew I wouldn't say anything.
Wow.
It was so odd. And I finally got myself to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And they stuck a little scope up my nose, a little tiny camera up my nose and down the back of my throat, and got this extremely memorable photo of my vocal cords. And you could tell from that photo what was wrong. I had these little angry blisters on both sides of the V that makes up our vocal cords. And that's a telltale sign of vocal nodules. It's like the blister when you've been raking a lawn, but you're not a gardener. So it's not like day 75, it's day 1. And they're just starting to get kind of red and angry, but they're not hardened. And I guess, thank God, it was caught at that point. But what the guy told me was, you have to go on vocal rest. And this is probably from habitually speaking a little bit too low. Why did I speak at a pitch that wasn't my natural pitch? And it took me a while to answer that question. And I went to a speech pathologist who helped me relearn how to talk. But in the meanwhile, I had this moment when I went back to class the day that I got that diagnosis. And I walked in and everybody stopped. And the guy who ran the program turned to me and he said, "So, what's the diagnosis?" And I said, like deeply painfully and barely audibly, vocal nodules. I have to go on vocal rest. And he said, just as I thought, bad usage. Right? Like it's a weird phrase and he's not wrong, but the way he said it made it totally clear in the moment. I'm to blame.
Yeah.
I fucked
Shamed
up.
you. Yeah, he shamed you. Yeah.
He shamed me. And I didn't know what to do with that shame. That lasted way longer than the actual vocal issues. And in a way, I realized while I was writing this book, it's the book I wish I had then.
That's beautiful. Can we almost thank him now, looking back, for what?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Totally. And also, look, everyone has their voice story. He was just projecting his own, you know? So is everyone who's ever told us you're too much, you're too loud, you're too quiet, or too whatever. They've got their own stuff. So
yeah. So this has so much to do with authenticity and being our authentic. There's so much out there about being our authentic selves. And so how do we speak with authenticity? How do we know we're speaking with authenticity? If you hear me talking to my best friend, it sounds very different than when I'm talking to my family or when I'm talking on my podcast.
I love that you say this because, yes, I think there's an accidental misunderstanding inside of authenticity that we have one authentic voice and all the others are fake. But what you've just beautifully articulated is that there's so many different versions of us that come out with our, I mean, you know, the word in linguistics is code switching. And this word gets used a huge amount culturally and is super loaded for the Black community because there is this obligation to sound quote unquote white in white spaces. But the term code switching is really meant to capture the spirit of any of us feeling that we should switch based on the room that we're in. And sometimes switch language, sometimes switch dialect, sometimes just switch sort of style of speech. And we do because we know who we're talking to. And we should, right? We should mirror. We talk to a 5-year-old differently than we talk to a lawyer who's calling because there's something wrong in a contract and they're going to try to sue us. I mean, that's such a different, you know, social act, those two things.
I mean, I found that even like at work, at my agency with my teams and all that, the more me that I've become in just speaking normal how I talk, and you know, I curse and all the things, and that actually gets me a much better feedback, and it makes everyone feel more connected, and it's more easy and chill, and everyone loves that.
So let me give a definition of authenticity so that we can some working definition rather than this like vague, because obviously I'm curious about this too. We all know, let's just name this. We all know that authenticity is about feeling true.
Okay.
We can feel it when someone's being that way to us. We can feel it when we are or aren't, right? So it's trying to capture some spirit of truthness, but how do we do that, right? And here's my working definition. Authenticity is talking about what we care about, like we care about it. And this is actually hard because most of us have a history, for very good reason, having to do with safety, really, a history of either talking about what we care about, but acting like we don't care about it to protect ourselves, right? I'm super, super enthusiastic about this, but it sounds crazy, so I'm going to sound less enthusiastic and just be like, whatever, right? Our voice can literally go into our throat and we can be like, yeah, I mean, here's an idea I had.
So this is constantly changing, depending on what you're talking about, at the time you're talking about it, to who you're talking about it. Authenticity is constantly in change, right?
Completely. But a habit we can get into, if there's sort of a spectrum here, is on one side, we can talk about what matters to us when we're in unsafe situations or uncomfortable situations. So maybe not with your best friend, maybe not with a 5-year-old, but when you're in an uncomfortable situation, and I think the bar for that can be really low, like just something where you're just not totally sure where you stand, what the other person's thinking, right? This happens all day, every day, right? So we can either habitually or in the moment undercare. We can know on our insides that we care a lot, but we can do everything we can to seem like we don't in order to protect ourselves. So often that means vocally that we go into our throat, right? And we go, yeah, I mean, it's cool, whatever, either way, right? This is like a huge deal to me, but like, we're not, So that's one thing we can do. And then the other, on the opposite extreme, is we can push. We can act like we care more than we do. This is often a customer habit, and certainly is in both sort of the bro marketing world and also in stereotypically kind of the people pleasing vibe that might seem more resonant with women. But it will sound like, oh my gosh, yes, I care so much about this thing, and I'm so glad to help everybody here and be of use. It's not necessarily untrue, but the amount of energy that you're putting in also feels like hiding.
Yeah.
It's hiding by over caring on that end and under caring on this end. So then the question is, what is it to dig deep, to take that real breath and to say, in that sweet spot in the middle between those extremes, I'm talking about something that matters to me, and I am willing to reveal that it matters to me.
Love that. It's a great definition.
Thanks.
Really cool definition. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about women and marginalized individuals and minorities, and how that sound of power and what you're doing and really what you're aiming to do with your book and everything you do in life, how does that affect particularly those groups of people, and how does it affect their roles, in society and work?
Well, the main thing is that anybody who identifies with those labels that you just used already on some level knows this is an issue. It's like the straight white men in my midst also could totally use a lot of this advice. My husband fits into that category, and he read the book and was like, oh. So I'm really, really pleased by that feedback I've been getting from multiple people. But the reality is that if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're queer, if you're an immigrant and English is your second language, you already know. You already know. You don't necessarily have exactly the language that there's quote unquote voice bias, but you know that how you talk is always something you need to be aware of. And the question is, how much do I chase some standard or not? And so I'm here to give some tips around how to even think about that. Not, to be clear, advice, do this or don't do this, because your lived experience will actually tell you what to do better than I ever would. And also what everybody's individual industries are, what your office vibe is, what the norms are, and how much wiggle room there is to match them or not, right? This is the sort of subtle stuff that you're picking up every day. What I'm here to talk about is specifically for the groups of people you just described. What do we do in the moments that really matter? What do we do when we get to pitch our idea to those VCs who really could fund our dream? What do we do when we get up in front of an audience at a conference and have some squirrely idea that's just ours, some mischievous idea, and we want to really make an impact with it? This is less about the office politics day to day. This is about those high stakes moments. And how do we give ourselves permission to show up in those moments like the version of ourselves that is the most weird and not the most generic? And the answer usually has to do with a bit of a clean out of the mind gunk around how you show up normally, what kind of feedback you've gotten, how you're trying to hide your weird, right? The ways in which you're different, and offering yourself an invitation to show up in a different way with a different level of joy or mischief than you're used to doing, and knowing that you're there to help. We can definitely get into that vibe when we're walking in to pitch to a VC. They hold all the power. I hold none. I hope they like my thing. I hope they don't laugh at me. And that is a holdover from this fear-based approach to public speaking that is totally understandable. That's exactly what we've all...
I mean, it is true. At that moment, that person holds the power. At that moment,
we hope that. Yes, and
right?
Yes, and
correct, right?
Yes, and that VC wants to find the thing that will give them not just a chance to make back their money, but also a chance to feel like they're doing good in the world, which is, they know and deeper and more meaningful. than whether or not they give you money. So there is a mindset shift. If we choose not to go in with the fear-based, but instead with the love-based approach to public speaking, I'm going to talk about what I care about in such a way that the care spreads, where we can think to ourselves, even if it feels ridiculous and delusional, it's so lovely. Why not try it? I would suggest. We can think to ourselves right before we go in, they are so, so lucky to have me talking to them about my idea because they need it. And that's a total power shift.
Yeah. At the end of the day, they're there because they are trying to find something different, something new, something more impactful. So,
and if they're not, great, bad fit. But at least you went in and had a little more fun. And actually, this is for any, it doesn't have to be as extreme as, the person who holds the purse strings. This is in any situation where we're speaking and other people are listening. I like to offer this metaphor that I came up with partly around, there's like a big old stereotype, and if it doesn't fit you, wonderful, that women aren't so great at telling stories not because they're bad storytellers, but because they talk themselves out of doing it, because they fear either that they will be self-indulgent if they tell a story and take up too much time, or that the story will be boring, not relevant. So instead, allow me to suggest that the allegory, the image, is somebody's choking, and CPR. And everyone else in the space is like panicking. Oh my God, someone's choking. Oh my God, what do we do? What do we do? What do you do? And you're there going, oh, I should probably raise my hand and say, I know CPR. And everybody will part ways and you'll go save the person. Would you in that moment ever go, I know CPR, but I don't want to make it about me?
Right.
And the challenge, and the lovely challenge inside of public speaking, is when we look out at an audience of people, they do not look like they are choking. And we get to use our imagination to go, what if they are? But what if they are?
When you pull something that's bigger than you, and that helps you not make it about you, about something bigger, something that has a greater impact, that's in the sense how they're choking and how you're doing something for a greater good.
Always, always. And I know your audience, right? Absolutely. We are doing something for a greater good. And whether or not we're doing it for the people in that room, or we're doing it for a group that we're representing that's not in that room, when we feel nerves, when we feel that kind of paralyzing fear of they're going to laugh at me, it's because we're accidentally falling into that trap of making it about us. And it is always about them. And the them is either the people in that room or someone who's not in that room that you represent, right? But making it about them, reinvesting in how much you are there to help them, the big them, will actually rearrange our nervous system.
I have to do that all the time, Samara.
Right? It's like carrying at scale. It's so good. Me too, with selling this book. It's like, you know what? I have not said a single time, please buy my book. I have said, grab yourself a copy and let's change what power sounds like, or some variation thereof. I even have a thing on my phone that says, every ask, make sure I'm asking on behalf of those who need this message, those who will be helped, the ancestors who couldn't access this kind of power, the kids who must.
Yeah, I love that. So, Samara, as this, with more power in our voices, there's a shift in power and leadership. And so as we were talking about women, minorities, and I bring in the subject of conscious business and conscious capitalism that we were talking about before, and of course, what a lot of this podcast is about, we care a lot about women in power and minorities and shifting the power. How does this affect business as a whole? How do you see more powerful voices in women and minorities and people that typically don't have the power? How does it change business overall, not just for them individually?
Well, and also, as I look at you, I also want to name that this really isn't just for women and people of color, although absolutely I center them in my book. And, I am a woman. But also it's for people who are willing to put values above the bottom line. And we know, hopefully, that, in good business models, we don't have to choose. But the idea of being the dreamer in the space, the person who's willing to do what's right, even if you lose money, that doesn't matter what your identity is. That already makes you a minority in a capitalist world. And that also is something I'm here to, protect and amplify. So I think the answer to the question, the real answer, is what I'm all about is inviting us to be the type of leadership we want to see in the world every time we have the chance to speak in those moments that matter. So if we want to grow, for our kids to grow up, or for us to come into our own, for our next phase, for our next, bit of time on this planet without horrific, climate challenges, if we want this era to be filled with conscious leaders who are willing to be emotionally available, who are willing to say when they're wrong, who are willing to think about leadership in a way that's about lifting others, who are about their background and their skills, not just making them a good leader because of those skills, but also because of the empathy that their background has, the lived experience that they've had. If we care about these things, if this is the type of leadership we want to see more of in the world, we have the opportunity and the obligation to show up as that type of leader every time we have the chance to speak in the moments that matter. So if we start to get emotional and we think, hide it, stoic is better, they won't take me seriously if I show that I care, we get to have that second wiser thought. Wait, no, I want the type of leadership that's willing to say, I'm being vulnerable in front of you because I'm showing you that I care and I'm not hiding it. And that will affect all those groups that you just named and everybody. I mean, everybody who's willing and interested in a different kind of leadership. It's how we can own that now.
Love that. Very much resonates. I think a lot of us see a book like yours, or even look at this subject, and a lot of people think this only matters to people in leadership, or those who are trying to speak publicly, or want to be in a position of power. But really, it matters to everybody, right? Communication and the way we speak. And I mean, it could be just a parent trying to speak to their teenager, trying to tell their teenager why maybe the right path is going in this direction of maybe education and not drugs or something like that, right? And they're having a conversation with a teenager, right? And
there's a bit of a thread of parenting in this because I'm a parent.
So there's parenting, right? And it's just like maybe even a lower level employee just trying to tell their boss something or something like that. So I think it matters to so many, it matters to everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, communication is literally the only way that's the one tool we're constantly using all day, every day. Even if you don't have your voice and you're signing, you're communicating. You have to communicate in order
to
I
even suggest, because I like to define public speaking quite broadly. I think it's a weird old-timey expression, and we get to define it however it actually feels applicable in our real lives. Asking a question in a meeting, at a big conference, asking a question.
Yeah.
Raising your hand and saying, yes, I'm going to be brave enough for the entire spotlight, every single pair of eyes to be on me. And of course, you're asking a question because you like the answer to that question, but it is also a chance to flex your own leadership muscle, even if you are the technically least high position person in that space, right? If you have the lowest quote unquote status, you hold the floor. And how do you ask that question in a way that reflects the kind of leadership you'd like to see more of in the world?
Yeah. I love that. I hadn't thought of that one, but yeah, it's the scariest thing when you're in a big crowd and you want to ask a question. It's just that. Yeah. It's great.
It's modeling. It's like, you and I are both doing this now in this interview. You deliberately swear. You said your oh shit moment up top, and then I was like, oh, that means this is the sweary show. Fantastic. I'll bring that version of me, right? And I have a cold, but I'm still like working through it in this way where I'm allowing myself to center my own joy and power and my version of power that feels good. You asked me earlier about what power sounds like. The reality is the old sound of power has kind of one definition. The new sound of power is inevitably diverse. It It is the diversity of all of us with our extremely unique lived experience coming out in the way we talk. And will we allow that to be the case, or will we try to squelch it? And I'm here. I mean, permission to speak really means permission to bring that version of us that reflects our life experience, that reflects what brings us joy, into spaces where the stakes are high, which is the hardest time, right?
Yeah. I love that. I asked you earlier about, we talked about accents in the beginning of the show. What about non-native? How much more difficult, or do you feel that people that are in fact non-natives, are English as a second language and not really truly bilingual or fluent? Because I've gone to some conferences with some keynotes where, there was, a French woman up there, or a Swedish man or whatever. And they had really thick, heavy accents. And even myself, like the very first quick judgment, there's something less than because they have this huge accent and English isn't their first language. And I had to think, I just noticed that. I'm like, why would I think that? Like, especially me, I'm from America, and you go through that whole thing. So easy.
Well, also, by the way, I appreciate you naming that, right? Because it is a bit vulnerable to name that we have voice biases, but thank you for calling that out, right? Yes. From my work with English as a second language clients, both in the business world and in the acting world, I can say that there's really two things going on. One is the actual sounds that they do or don't have access to, right? So there's sounds in American English that maybe don't exist in their native language, and they have to figure out, how do I make a TH sound? Right. Do I just avoid it? Do I make a D? What do I do there? But the more interesting question is their relationship to speaking English, to how they show up, to confidence. And somebody who has what we would think of as a light accent, where the sound, they've actually figured out how to make most of the sounds in American English and we understand them, but who are so self-conscious about their accent that they do vocal hiding anyway. They kind of hide their body, they hide their heart, they hide their throat, right? They mumble, maybe they put their hands over their mouth when they talk. I've seen all of this. Are they in a better or worse communication position than somebody who has what we would call a thicker accent, who has less access to the American sounds, but who has just decided they are English right where they stand?
Yeah, it's clear. At the end of the day, it's the sound of power that you were talking about, right?
That's right.
It's that confidence, it's how they're carrying.
That's right. Which is not to invalidate that accent bias is real. And both of those groups are completely validated in knowing that having an English as a second non-native language, as you say, non-native accent, is going to affect how they get treated. But then they get to decide, how do I meet that moment?
Sure. And I don't know if this is the right analogy, but it just kind of came to my head. It's something like, okay, you grow up and you love playing basketball, and like your homies on your team, they're 6'7" and 6'5", and you're 6'0", you're going to have a little bit of a disadvantage, but that doesn't mean you can't play the game. And if you can have different ways that you can go in and be better at in different ways and attack it differently. And if you've got the confidence, you can still be a great ball player. You don't have to be 7 feet tall. Right. So
I love that. Totally.
Wow.
And, we can't affect our height.
Exactly.
In some cases with the accents, you can go find a dialect coach, whatever, but maybe you can't affect your accent. Look, we all had sounds that we had access to. Here, I'll put this differently. When we were babies, all of us have access to all the sounds humanly possible.
Right.
And then depending on exposure, the synapses break off.
Right.
Oh, we don't need that sound. It's not going to be useful. Learning that language 20 years later, 30 years later, after those synapses died off, is hard, possibly impossible, depending on, your own, whatever, psychology and access and everything. So working on the other skills, like how to be confident as the version of English that you are, is definitely a way to level the field.
Absolutely. What's the most outlandish tip or thing that you've heard in terms like other speech coaches or something that have mentioned that you're like, that is not a good?
I'll tell you one that is outlandish, but also totally normal. Count your ums and uhs.
Huh.
This kind of thing drives me batty. I get it. The impulse is if somebody says and a lot, they are in their head about not sounding fluid. How can you help them? Well, you can make them conscious of their habits. I get it. But the reality of telling somebody, especially somebody who's already at a disadvantage in a, white patriarchal world, that policing yourself further is the secret, is the opposite of permission. You know what the opposite of permission is? Shame. So to just embarrass yourself over and over and over, it's like I care about everybody making the impact they want to make and also feeling good, like their body actually feeling good while they do it. So
Yeah.
I don't think counting your ums and uhs is the solution to feeling good. I will say, in my own experience and from coaching thousands of people at this point, two things about ums and uhs, if you are actually worried about this. One, a certain amount of and all of us do, and it's a generous act. We're not even aware we're doing it. It signifies, I'm gathering my thought, I'm about to finish it. Don't worry, I'll get back to you in a moment. And the listener does not hear it as an or an They hear it in exactly the way that it was intended. Oh, I shouldn't interrupt. There's a second half of the thought coming up. So a lot of the ums and uhs are actually just totally practical and serve their purpose. If you fear that you're umming and ahhing more than that, or you know you are when you're talking about certain subjects that you haven't worked through how to talk about yet, the answer is obviously partly working through how to talk about it, partly deeper than that. You may not be totally believing that you deserve to take up time and space and that your ideas are worthy. I have found in my own life that when I trust that what I have to say matters, I say and less. And so do my clients.
Naturally. Just happens.
So on the one hand, police them, every single and which will just make you more self-conscious. On the other hand, invest in how much your ideas are worth hearing. You know, I sold this book in this crazy bidding war. 13 publishers were fighting over the book. It was wild. And they were all calling me a thought leader. And, you know, obviously there was a part of me that was rolling my eyes at that. Like, okay, influencer, thought leader. Sure. That term can just get thrown around to everybody these days. And then the other part of me was like, wait, but if I just roll my eyes, I'm missing the opportunity here, which is, if I'm a thought leader, if you're a thought leader, if any of us are thought leaders, how much more would we trust our own thoughts? Why don't we just do it?
Especially, I think that we are in a world where so much power is given to followership on social media and things like that, where, you know, if we don't have that and we're not a quote unquote influencer, we don't feel like a thought leader. Whereas before that, it didn't even exist. I think that has a lot of, it has a big negative effect on a lot of things. And so it's easier to feel small when we're constantly in such a bigger comparison mode since the moment we wake up. It's just.
So, you know, inside of all of that is just an invitation. Just what if I thought of myself as a thought leader, or fill in the blank, any other term that doesn't make you cringe? How much more would I trust my own thoughts?
I love thought leader.
And that is good. And that is a more effective way to deal with your ums and uhs. The end.
There
you know?
I love that. Yeah, that's great. Samara, what are 2 traits that a conscious leader must embody today for you?
I think emotional availability is really hard. I think there's such pathologizing of emotions in our culture. And by emotions, I don't just mean sadness, right? Enthusiasm, hope, optimism, anger, fire, you know? Being able to tap into those things and know that the message that you're sharing, if it feels appropriate for any of those emotions to coexist, then it is. It is appropriate. And it's actually inappropriate for them not to exist. That is hiding. And you're not going to be as trustworthy. So what is the second half of your message, right? The first half is the words. The second half is the emotional content that goes with the words. And are you brave enough to show up with both parts of that message?
Love that.
I think the other is listening, compassionate listening, and knowing that part of what we're listening for when we're listening to the people, you know, who are below us is different styles of communication, and getting curious rather than judgy.
I love that. I love that, Samara. Well, Permission to Speak is officially out, so go out and get yourself a copy. Samara, thank you so much for being on. You truly are a conscious leader yourself, so keep doing you. Thank you again.
Oh, thanks for that. That's really sweet.
Thanks,
Thank
Samara.
you.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. You know, it takes a lot to put these things together, but I truly love doing it. If you enjoyed this episode or the show in general, and you listen to it on audio podcast, please take some time to give it a review. It would really mean a lot to me. And if you watch the video, please go ahead and just click subscribe and share it with somebody that you think would like it. It would really mean the world to me, and it helps keep the show alive. Visit sebastiannaum.com for more content, and follow me on Instagram at sebnaum. That's SEBNAUM. Thanks again for spending your time with me. I know it is valuable. I hope you have a great rest of the day and week. Till next time.